Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into feudal Japan. Some really fascinating, sometimes startling stuff. You've shared some incredible sources, and I think it gives a real shortcut to understanding this complex society. We're going way beyond the usual samurai stories, into a world of strict codes, really surprising customs, deep symbolism. Get ready for, well, everything from strange beauty rituals to deadly tests of skill, even ancient identity theft.
Yeah, and what really stands out, I think, is how deeply tradition, honor, deception, and ritual defined, well, everything. Daily life, the very fabric of society. So our mission here isn't just to list these things. We want to get at the why, connect them to the bigger picture, Japan's values, its social structure. And we'll see how these customs, even the ones that seem really different, they all point to this society built on duty, symbolism, and reputation. A huge focus on reputation.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How people literally wore their status, their beliefs
Yeah.
on their bodies. So where do we start? What's maybe the most striking example of that from the sources?
Well, visually, maybe one of the most arresting is Ohaguro, the practice of blackening teeth. When you look at this, it was common among nobles, samurai families, later married women. It really shows how personal identity, marital fidelity, social rank, it was literally inscribed onto the body, a visible, permanent declaration. The process itself used a solution of iron filings dissolved in vinegar, often mixed with things like tea powder or sake to help with the application and maybe the taste, I guess, applied to get that deep lacquer-like blackness.
Wow, literally inscribed. That's powerful. So, okay, beyond just looking different, what message did Ohaguro actually send? What did it signify? And you mentioned practical benefits. For something that sounds purely aesthetic.
Right. Well, for married women, it was a really profound signal of commitment, fidelity, almost like, an indelible wedding ring. For samurai men, it could signal sophistication, refinement, showing they weren't just warriors, but also cultured people adhering to certain aesthetic norms. And yeah, interestingly, the sources do confirm it wasn't purely cosmetic. That mixture, the iron and the tannic acid from tea or other ingredients, it actually acted as a kind of primitive dental sealant, helped prevent tooth decay. So a pretty surprising practical benefit mixed in with the ritual.
That is surprising. A beauty ritual that's also basic dentistry. Amazing. How often do they have to do it? Was it like a daily thing?
Typically every few days, maybe once a week. It depended on how dark they wanted the color to stay.
Yeah.
And the preparation itself, yeah, it was often quite ritualized. Specific recipes, methods passed down. You can imagine the smell, that sort of distinct metallic scent being pretty common in those households. But like a lot of these customs, it eventually faded. Mostly during the Meiji Restoration, late 19th century, white teeth became the new standard, influenced by Western ideals of beauty.
Okay, so that's teeth. But appearance wasn't just about that, was it? Let's shift from Ohaguro to something much more obvious, maybe the most iconic image of a samurai, the Chonmage hairstyle. We all picture it, right?
Huh.
Shaved crown, the rest tied up in that top knot. Was that just fashion from the start or something more practical?
Initially, purely practical, yeah. It created this sort of flat, slightly padded surface on the head, made wearing those heavy samurai helmets, the kabuto, much more comfortable in battle, prevented chafing, helped it sit right. But like many things, it evolved quickly. It became much more than practical. It turned into this definitive badge of honor, a visible sign of warrior identity, status, commitment to the samurai class.
Right, so if it was that important to their identity, what happened if it was, forcibly removed? What do the sources say about that kind of humiliation?
Oh, it was profound. Losing your Chonmage wasn't just like a bad haircut. It was a deep disgrace, a public stripping of your honor, your identity as a samurai. Our sources describe it as one of the most severe punishments, short of actual death. It meant a total loss of status, respect. You were essentially branded an outcast. It really highlights how much external symbols can be tied to our sense of self, our place in society, even today maybe.
Definitely makes you think. And while it was officially abolished during modernization, that image, it's really stuck around, hasn't it? We still see versions of it with kabuki actors, sumo wrestlers. Keeps that visual alive, reminds us of its deep roots. Okay, so from these personal statements, these symbols of identity and beauty, let's move towards the sharper edges of life, where honor and duty had literal life or death stakes. Thinking about the Kaiken, that small dagger, this wasn't for men, right? This was carried by women from samurai families. What does that tell us?
Exactly. This was specifically for women. And the Kaiken, it really symbolizes this paradox, a paradox of agency and burden placed on samurai women. They were given this tool for self-preservation, yes, but often with the expectation that its ultimate use was for preserving honor through self-sacrifice. It was small, usually 20-25 centimeters, tucked away in their kimono sleeve or their obi sash, discreet.
A paradox.
Yeah.
Agency and burden. That's interesting. So defense, yes, but also this final, very grim option. What kind of training do they get? Do they start young?
Yes, remarkably young, often trained alongside the boys in handling weapons, including the Kaiken. This wasn't just about fighting skills. It instilled discipline, courage, loyalty, this deep understanding of the importance of family honor. So the Kaiken had that dual purpose you mentioned, practical protection, definitely. But more critically, it was the means for preserving honor if facing capture or some unbearable dishonor. They could perform a type of ritual suicide, often a swift cut to the neck artery. It was called jigai. Unlike the men's more public seppuku, this was expected to be private, immediate, an ultimate act of loyalty. It speaks volumes, really, about the extreme expectations on women to maintain dignity, protect the family name, no matter the cost.
It's a heavy thought.
Yeah.
Tragic symbol, maybe, but also one of female strength and dignity in that context. But while the Kaiken shows this sort of internal strength, this focus on inner honor, the drive for martial skill, for a warrior's reputation, could also manifest in some really horrifying external ways. The sources mention something called Tsujigiri. Can you explain that?
Yep.
Sounds
It is chilling. Tsujigiri, literally crossroad cutting. This was a brutal practice where samurai would actually test a new sword, or sometimes just practice their technique, by attacking an unsuspecting passerby, usually at night, often at a crossroads. Just shocking to think about.
absolutely shocking. And it wasn't just about testing the blade's sharpness, was it? There's more to it. What kind of conditions allowed something like that to even happen?
Well, it points to this really brutal intersection of the quest for martial perfection and, frankly, a kind of moral vacuum during periods of chaos. It was most common during the 15th, 16th centuries, the Sengoku period, the Warring States era. Central authority was weak, constant warfare, and individual samurai skill was paramount, sometimes justifying horrific violence. Imagine walking alone at night. Crossroads were often seen as liminal spaces, boundaries between worlds, life and death. And knowing a samurai might just be there, waiting to test his new sword on you. It really reflects the unchecked power samurai could wield then, where commoners' lives were sometimes valued less in proving a weapon or a skill.
That adds such a layer of terror to the time. Thankfully, it didn't last. What stopped it?
Right. It was eventually banned, made a capital crime under the Tokugawa shogunate, which started in the early 17th century. The Tokugawa brought relative peace, stability, much stricter social control. That kind of random violence against commoners just didn't fit their vision of an ordered, hierarchical society. They really worked to curb the individual power of samurai, ensure public order. So Tsujigiri became severely punished. And today, yeah, it's remembered as a really dark stain on the samurai legacy. A grim reminder.
Okay, so from that individual horror, let's look at something more formalized. Still gruesome, though. Kubijiken. Head inspection. After a battle, warriors collected enemy heads. They proved kills. What was that whole process like? What does it say about how they viewed warfare?
It really shows how societies can formalize, even ritualize, the most gruesome parts of war, turn them into a performance of valor, even a system of record keeping. So yes, after a battle, warriors would collect the heads of enemies they'd slain. Important enemies, ideally. And the process was quite formal. The heads weren't just, dumped somewhere. They were cleaned. The hair was meticulously groomed. Sometimes they were even perfumed. Then they were presented for formal inspection by commanders. Imagine a tent, heads arranged, maybe on stands, maybe incense burning to mask the smell.
Wow, that's a vivid and pretty grim picture. So it wasn't just a trophy. It was almost bureaucratic. What was the payoff? And were there any rules even in that?
Exactly. Bureaucratic is a good word for it, in a way. Depending on the rank of the enemy, which they'd try to identify by armor, appearance, maybe prior knowledge, the warrior had earned promotions, land, or other rewards. It served a very practical purpose when written records of battlefield deeds were hard to come by. The head was undeniable proof. But, and this is interesting, the sources stress there was a code. It was considered deeply dishonorable to disrespect an enemy's head. You had to present it properly. Messing that up could even negate your reward. So even in that brutality, there's this complex warrior ethos trying to impose order and ritual. And like Tsujigiri, this practice also faded significantly once the long Tokugawa peace set in, less large-scale warfare.
Okay, so we've covered some intense personal statements, the harsh realities of war. Let's shift now maybe to the more social strategic undercurrents, things shaping daily life, the bigger power plays. What does all this mean for, say, everyday relationships?
Well, let's start with a custom related to romance that might seem pretty startling today. It's called Yobai, or night visit courtship. This was apparently quite common, especially among peasants in rural areas. A man would basically sneak into the room of a woman he was interested in, usually after dark, and stay until morning.
Okay, yeah, that definitely sounds like it would raise eyebrows now. But you said it was seen as courtship, not just, well, sneaking around.
Yeah.
How did they make that distinction? What were the unwritten rules there?
That's a great question, and it really shows how differently cultures can define romance and intention. In that specific context, Yobai was sort of understood as a recognized step in courtship. Sources suggest there was often an implicit family consent, or at least awareness. It wasn't usually a total surprise. The key thing was repetition. If a man visited repeatedly, it signaled serious intentions, often led to marriage. If he stopped coming, well, that meant she wasn't interested anymore, and she was free to consider others. It was kind of a pragmatic system in a society without maybe the formal dating rituals we have, especially for lower classes.
A subtle dance of social signals, then. Interesting. But I guess, like the others, it didn't last.
No, it didn't survive modernization, really. It gradually died out with the spread of stricter Confucian morals, later Christianity, and just general westernization from the Meiji era onwards. These brought different ideas about propriety, public courtship, marriage. Yobai just didn't fit anymore. So today it's seen as this sort of curiosity, a quaint piece of rural Japan's past traditions. Very different from its original function.
Okay, from that very private rural custom, let's swing over to the big cities, the vibrant public social scenes. Let's talk Mizu Shōbai, the water trade.
Yeah.
This whole network of tea houses, pleasure quarters, thriving in places like Edo, Kyoto, Osaka. What made these districts so important culturally beyond just being places for fun?
Oh, they were much more than just entertainment hubs. They became these incredibly vibrant centers of, well, everything. Business, politics, hype culture. They were like melting pots. Merchants, samurai, artists, writers, even political figures could mingle there, more informally than in the rigid structures of everyday life. Information was exchanged, deals were made, trends were set, and it's really crucial, as our sources highlight, to understand the different roles within this water trade. Geisha, for instance, they were highly trained entertainers, masters of traditional arts, music, dance, poetry, conversation, etiquette. Their profession explicitly did not involve selling sex. They were artists, companions, admired for their skill and refinement.
Right, so geisha were artists, cultural figures almost. How did they differ from, say, courtesans? You mentioned oiran earlier.
Yes, a very important distinction. Geisha were about art and sophisticated company. Oiran, the high-ranking courtesans, did offer intimate companionship, but they were also incredibly skilled artists themselves. Highly trained in etiquette, arts, fashion, they were often major celebrities, trendsetters, commanding huge respect and influence within those quarters. But their role explicitly included intimacy, unlike geisha. These districts, the Mizu Shōbai, and the distinct cultures they nurtured, they left a huge mark. Still remembered today as symbols of Japanese elegance, sophistication, art, testament to their impact.
That clarification definitely helps. Okay, one last area, and this is pure high-stakes deception. Kagemusha, the shadow warrior. It wasn't just finding someone who looked similar, right? This was a body double-trained meticulously. Behavior, posture, speech, everything. Sounds intense.
Absolutely intense and critically strategic. Kagemusha were used to deceive enemies, obviously, make them think a lord was somewhere he wasn't, or still alive when he wasn't. But just as importantly, maybe more so, they were used to maintain morale within their own forces. Imagine the chaos if a powerful leader suddenly died. A Kagemusha could keep that secret, prevent panic, allow for a smooth transition, project an aura of continuity, invincibility.
So it's about psychology as much as deception.
Wow. Is there a really famous example of this working? And what must that have been like for the double, the pressure? The most famous case, yeah, is probably Daimyo Takeda Shingen, a legendary warlord. The sources recount how after his death, his inner circle used a Kagemusha to keep it secret for, believe it or not, about 2 years. Some accounts say even longer. This let his clan regroup, consolidate power, avoid being immediately attacked by rivals like Oda Nobunaga or Tokugawa Ieyasu. As for the double, the pressure must have been immense, unimaginable. It wasn't just looking the part. You had to be the part. Mimic mannerisms, voice, decision-making patterns sometimes. It demanded incredible loyalty, nerves of steel, total self-control. One slip-up could doom your entire clan. It really shows the power of image and maybe the ultimate sacrifice for the cause in a warfare.
Truly underscores that psychological dimension. And I suppose once Japan was unified and centralized, the need for Kagemusha kind of faded.
Exactly. With more stable governance under the Tokugawa and later the Meiji government, that kind of high-stakes battlefield deception became less common. But the concept, yeah, it still resonates. Symbolizes cunning strategy, psychological warfare, the power of image.
What an incredible journey, really, through feudal Japan. We've touched on everything from ritual teeth-blackening warrior hairstyles to deadly sword tests, women's daggers of honor, and these cunning shadow warriors. It's just so clear how tradition, honor, deception, ritual, how they all just permeated everything. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely. And ultimately, these customs, however strange or extreme they might seem to us now, they really speak to the universal human things, don't they? The need for identity, for belonging, for security, finding meaning in a complicated world. They're just maybe more intense manifestations of desires and fears we still recognize. Understanding these details, I think it helps us grasp that whole intricate web duty symbol reputation that shaped an entire civilization, and maybe gives us a lens on our own.
That's a great point. Which leads to a final thought for you, the listener. What surprising, maybe seemingly strange, practices exist in our world today? Think about it maybe in our workplaces, our online lives, social circles, even just personal routines. What things do we do that future generations might look back on and find just as peculiar or as deeply symbolic as we find these aspects of feudal Japan? Something to mull over. Thanks for tuning in.